Kindness is a virtue only when born of strength. When born of fear, it becomes a leash. You believe that always being kind will guarantee love, respect, and loyalty. But look at your own history. How many times have you given in, sacrificed, tried to please, and instead of recognition, received pressure, contempt, or even humiliation? Machiavelli would say this is the most dangerous form of naivety, because those who offer kindness without calculation are not seen as virtuous, but as a resource that can be used, exploited, and discarded. And worst of all, the more you give, the more the world demands. In this video, we'll break the myth that keeps you stuck. You'll understand why your kindness doesn't inspire respect, but rather abuse, and how to turn it into a strategic weapon. Calculated kindness, with limits, with counterbalance, with consequences. This is how you move from being the carpet to being the one who controls the game. And I want you to think now, how many times, by being too nice, have you lost respect instead of earning it? Leave your comments. Naming these situations is the first step to never repeating them again. Because today, you'll learn the difference between being an admired man and being a used man. And the first law is clear. Those who bend too much will inevitably be stepped on. You've been conditioned to believe that being consistently kind will guarantee love, consideration, and loyalty. That being available, patient, and helpful at all times will earn you respect. But the reality is grim. The more you bend, the more the world will step on you. And not out of explicit malice, but because you yourself have taught others that you can be used without cost. At work, you take on responsibilities that aren't yours, cover for colleagues' mistakes, and extend deadlines to avoid friction. At first, it seems like a virtue, but soon the pattern sets in. You're not seen as trustworthy, but as someone who can handle everything. And those who can handle everything invariably get overwhelmed. At home, you give in on lunches, trips, and favors because you don't want to appear selfish. But the invisible message you send is clear. Your word has no boundaries. Your limits can always be pushed further. Machiavelli would say that there is no virtue where there is no strength, because kindness that is not protected is not seen as greatness, but as weakness. And weakness in the human game does not elicit gratitude. It awakens opportunism. That's why so many good, genuinely good people end up becoming easy targets. They believe their silence will be rewarded. But the silence of the carpet never generates recognition. It only generates the certainty that the next step will be taken. The practice is clear. When helping, set the limit before you even begin. A simple, direct sentence without justification. I can go this far. After that, no. It's not harsh. It's self-preservation. And when the limit is crossed, don't waste energy arguing. Just follow through with the consequence you set for yourself. The world respects a firm gesture, not an empty promise. The rug may be beautiful, clean, even ornate, but its function, if it's not removed from the floor, is always the same: to be walked on. And you weren't born to be anyone's floor. Now, reflect calmly. How many times in your life have you turned into a carpet? How many times have you confused submission with kindness, believing that would earn you respect? Write in the comments, because naming the times you've bent too far is the first step to never accepting being walked on again. And if the law of the rug shows the root of exploitation, the next one will reveal the poison that fuels this cycle: forced gratitude, used as a weapon to keep you captive. You've done so much for people who, deep down, would never do the same for you. You gave up time, energy, and opportunities. And at first, You believed that would create a moral debt, a bond of respect. But what you received in return wasn't consideration. It was demand. The illusion is this: if I'm good, they'll remember and treat me with loyalty. But the reality is different. Those who receive a favor don't remain grateful for long. They get used to it. The favor that seemed like a grand gesture yesterday becomes an obligation tomorrow. You become a guaranteed resource, not a respected ally. Think about the coworker you always blame for their mistakes. At first, they're grateful. Then, they start to trust you'll be there to correct their mistake again. There's no reverence, no admiration. There's only the certainty that you're still available. In the family, it's the relative who asks for money just this once and repeats the request month after month. Each favor granted fuels the next abuse. Machiavelli would have had no illusions about this. He knew that favors create dependence, not loyalty. And dependence in the social game almost never flows upward. Those who help too much end up at the bottom, supporting those who have learned to rely on them. So the rule is simple. Favors don't buy respect. They buy convenience. And convenience is not power. If you want to break this cycle, you need to act coolly. Accept help only if you can immediately repay in a small way. If you can't, make it clear: I appreciate it, but I won't be able to repay you in the way you imagine. By doing so, you cut the root of the hidden contract, the one that would make you eternally indebted. The consequence of not doing this is obvious. Excessive kindness doesn't create allies. It creates parasites. People who drain your energy, your patience, your time, and who disappear the first moment you need them. The metaphor is brutal, but necessary. A cup that constantly fills is not seen as a sacred source. It becomes sewage, used by everyone without any respect. Now reflect. How many people in your life have become accustomed to your help as if it were their right? How many mistake your favor for an obligation? Write in the comments. Because only when you name these parasites do you begin to regain your strength. And if so far we've talked about kindness that bends and favors that enslave, the next step is to understand the root of respect: discomfort. The ability to impose a cost when someone disregards you. Have you ever noticed how the world only respects what can hurt? The rose is admired for its beauty, but it's the thorn that prevents careless hands from thoughtlessly plucking it. Without the thorn, the rose would be just another flower, plucked and discarded in seconds. Kindness that doesn't impose friction suffers the same fate. When you always respond with patience, when you forgive without consequence, when you silently accept offenses, your presence loses value. The other person learns quickly. They can cross boundaries without cost. You're no longer seen as someone worthy of respect, but as a free space for emotional release. Machiavelli would say that whoever wants to be feared at least once will be respected many times, because respect isn't born from a gentle gesture. It's born from the memory that surpassing you can hurt. The strategy is simple, but it requires courage. The next time someone crosses your line, don't explain. Don't make lengthy excuses. Apply the consequences you've already defined. If a colleague is always late, withdraw your help on the next task. If a relative invades your time, end the conversation the minute they exceed the agreed time. If a partner tries to manipulate you with drama, respond with calculated silence. It's not revenge, it's cost. The human brain learns more from pain than from kindness. And to be remembered as someone worthy of respect, you need to make it clear that there's a price to be paid when your boundaries are violated. The effect is immediate. The same colleague who treated you like a convenient conveyor belt begins to think twice before leaning on you. The same relative who abused your patience begins to mince words and timetables. The same partner who tested your calm discovers there's no stage for a show. Because deep down, respect isn't born from constant kindness. Respect is born from contrast, from the certainty that behind every generous gesture, there's a thorn. Now reflect. When was the last time someone crossed your line without suffering any consequences? And if, at that moment, you had imposed the thorn, what would have changed? Write in the comments, because naming this mistake is the first step to never repeating it again. And when you understand the power of the thorn, you also discover another fundamental law: counterbalance. Because even kindness needs the right distance to not lose its shine. There's a fatal mistake men make in all walks of life, believing that the more present they are, the more they'll be valued. You overgive yourself, are always available, respond immediately, and accept invitations without filtering. And at first, this constant presence seems to create closeness, but over time, it erodes respect. The logic is cruel, but simple. Anything that is too abundant loses value. The more you offer yourself without friction, the more the other person becomes accustomed to having you. And what is guaranteed is never respected. Machiavelli would understand this without difficulty. He knew that even goodness requires scarcity to be valued. A prince who displays himself in excess inspires not authority, but saturation. The subject begins to see flaws, to laugh at what he once feared, to treat as common what should be rare. Therefore, the rule is counterbalance. If you offer kindness, also offer distance. This isn't about playing childish games, but about protecting the value of your presence. Reduce your availability by 30%. Respond to messages on your own time, not on others. Reduce visits to environments where you're always the one giving in. Establish breaks where your absence is felt. The effect is immediate. Those who used to use you begin to measure their words. Those who once expected you to always be ready begin to evaluate whether it's worth calling on you. What was saturation becomes respect. Think about gold. It doesn't shine because it's placed on every street corner. It shines because it's rare, because it appears at the right times, in small, controlled quantities. Its presence, if unbalanced, turns to rust, but when measured, it turns to gold. Now reflect. In how many environments have you become cheap iron by always being there? And how would it change if you started treating your presence like gold? Rare, but impossible to ignore. Write in the comments, because respect isn't born from boundless constancy, but from scarcity that creates value. But there's still one piece missing, because even scarcity isn't enough if the kindness you offer isn't calculated. And that's where the real mask game begins. You grew up hearing that true kindness comes from the heart, without expecting anything in return. And perhaps that's why you believed that always acting spontaneously, offering help, attention, or favors would make you respected. But the reality is different. Genuine kindness, when distributed without filter, is not seen as a virtue. It's perceived as naivete. Machiavelli didn't believe in innocent gestures. For him, every act has a calculation behind it, and every gesture must serve a greater purpose. When you act without thinking, offering kindness to everyone without distinction, what you're creating is not respect, but exploitation. Look at history. Julius Caesar didn't simply hand out favors because he was generous. He knew exactly who to help, when, and what future debt he wanted to generate. Every gesture seemed like kindness, but it was actually a strategy. He didn't create fragile allies. He created selective debtors, men who, at some point, would need to repay. This is the game of masquerade, appearing generous, but acting with calculation. And you can apply this to your daily life. Before each act of kindness, ask yourself a simple question. What power does this give me back? If the answer is none, keep your mask on. If the answer is clear, access, support, priority, influence, then act. But do so in a way that the other person understands. That kindness wasn't a random gift, but a gesture that, sooner or later, will demand reciprocity. Because kindness without calculation is like a sweet poison poured into any glass. It has no direction, no strategic effect, but calculated kindness is like poison, given in controlled doses, invisible at first, devastating in the aftermath. You need to understand, the world respects less those who constantly appear too good. Respect arises when others know that your kindness is rare, selective, and above all, intentional. Now, reflect calmly. How many times have you used spontaneous kindness, thinking you were winning allies, but only created parasites? How many times was your gesture seen as an obligation, not a choice? Write in the comments, because when you start to calculate your kindness, you discover that it can be a weapon, not a weakness. But for this to truly work, you need to understand the last and toughest of laws, the law of the invisible contract. Because those who don't set a price end up becoming property. Every relationship, every agreement, every interaction carries a silent contract. Even when nothing is said, the clauses are being written. And if you don't set your terms, the other person writes theirs. Guess where you stand? As the resource, as the tool, as the property. Think about the last time you helped someone without asking for anything in return. Maybe it was a coworker, a relative, a friend. You believed your kindness would be seen as generosity. But what happened next? The gesture became the norm. What was once an exception became an expectation. And when you didn't do it again, the other person felt betrayed. This is how the invisible contract works. If you give without giving in return, the other person feels entitled to it. Not because they asked, but because you allowed it. And over time, you lose your status as a person and become a resource. Machiavelli would have no doubts about this. Those who do not impose prices are governed. Those who do not establish clauses are dominated. Respect arises not from generosity, but from imposed reciprocity. The practice is straightforward. Every time you offer something, transform it into a measurable exchange. It doesn't have to be money. It could be support at a later date, priority in a decision, access to a resource, but it needs to be visible. Respect only exists when the other person understands that their presence is costly. Otherwise, you enter the most dangerous category, the tame horse. Always ready, always docile, always available. The wild horse is respected because it can resist, can injure, can refuse the saddle. The tame horse is only good for carrying weight until exhaustion. You have to choose. Will you be seen as wild, difficult to tame, but respected, or as docile, always useful, but never valued? Now I want you to think, in how many places in your life have you signed invisible contracts without realizing it? How many papers have you accepted without including their clauses, believing that kindness would be enough? Write in the comments. Because only when you recognize where you've become property can you begin to reclaim your sovereignty. Kindness doesn't command respect, This is the harsh truth you must accept if you want to step out of the role of subject and assume that of prince. Because unlimited kindness, distributed without calculation, is not a virtue. It's a sentence of exploitation. It creates parasites, invites abuse, and turns you into property. Respect arises from another source, from clear boundaries, from consequences applied without hesitation, from scarcity that preserves value, from the mask that hides calculation. It is the blend of presence and distance, of sweetness and thorn. It is the awareness that every relationship is a contract, and those who do not impose clauses will be governed by the other's terms. Machiavelli reminds us that power is not granted, it is exercised. And in the human game, those who expect to be respected for their kindness will always be disappointed. Respect doesn't come from explanations or favors. It comes from the strength you demonstrate when you say no and deliver, from the cost you impose when someone crosses your line, from the calculated silence that shows that your kindness is a choice, not an obligation. You need to decide now. Will you continue to believe the myth that being kind will always guarantee consideration? Or will you assume that only kindness, with calculation, balance, and consequences, builds true authority? Remember, the carpet is beautiful, but it will inevitably be stepped on. The gentle horse is useful, but never respected. The naive man is admired for a moment, but discarded the next. But the man who combines kindness and calculation, restraint and firmness is never forgotten. And I want you to write in the comments, which of these laws do you most need to apply today? Where in your life is naivety still costing you respect? Because, in the end, the choice is simple. Either you control your kindness as a weapon, or it will control you as a weakness. And Machiavelli would smile when he remembers, those who do not impose a price will never be free.